The night my fiancé's mother showed up. I know his secret, she whispered. When she showed me the photos. The night Nico's mother showed up at my door felt almost surreal, like the start of a horror movie. It was cold and damp, with a thick mist rolling off the ocean and creeping through my yard. The street was dead quiet, barely a porch light on across the way. I'd settled into my new little place in Camden, Maine, just a few months earlier, trying to carve out my own corner of the world with Nico by my side. Or at least, that was the plan. Nico was away on a business trip. He was always traveling for work as a project manager at a construction firm based in Philly, where we both used to live. I like to think that these trips were the price we paid for a life we were building together. I mean, we were finally engaged, after 5 years. 5 years of getting to know each other, of me learning to put up with his big, complicated family who had about as many opinions as they did Sunday dinners. His mother, Viviana, was a particular challenge. I'd lost count of the times I'd been on the receiving end of her sharp tongue and scathing side eye. Viviana. She was that type of woman who wore everything like armor, the heavy perfume, the perfect nails, the designer scarves knotted perfectly around her neck, even in summer. From the first moment we met, she'd looked at me like I was an outsider. Sure, I wasn't Italian, but neither was she was Romanian, and she'd married into that big Italian family. But apparently, I was the wrong kind of outsider. No Italian roots, no large Catholic family, no stories of a shared past growing up in Philly. I didn't have those ties, and she never let me forget it. When Nico proposed, I hoped things would finally smooth out between Viviana and me. We'd have family dinners, maybe she'd take me under her wing as she prepped us for our wedding. But the day after we got engaged, when Nico's family threw us a party, she made a toast that managed to feel like a slap to my face. To Nico and Ariana, she'd said, her gaze heavy on me as she held up her glass. To making wise decisions and starting a family with someone who understands the importance of tradition. Her voice had carried a hint of warning, a threat almost, and when she clinked her glass against mine, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. But Nico was always in my corner, or so I thought. He'd kiss my forehead after every family gathering and tell me to ignore her. She just doesn't understand you yet, he'd whisper. But she will. I know it. So when I heard the knock on my door that night, I wasn't prepared to see her standing there. Viviana wasn't the kind of woman who'd ever just pop by unannounced. She looked unsettled, her usual immaculate appearance ruined by the rain that plastered her black hair to her face and soaked her coat. Viviana? I stammered, clutching the door handle. I must have looked like an idiot standing there in my pajamas, with my glass of wine dangling from one hand. Ariana, I need to speak with you, she said, her voice unusually soft, almost pleading. She glanced over her shoulder as if she thought someone might be watching. I stepped aside, too shocked to do anything but let her in. She breezed past me, bringing a sharp scent of Chanel and wet wool into the living room. She glanced around like she was checking out the place, maybe seeing if it met her standards, though the last time she'd been here, she'd called it quaint with that barely there sneer of hers. I'm sorry, I don't mean to intrude, she said, turning to face me, her eyes shifting between mine and the floor. It's fine, I said, still thrown. Do you want to sit? I can. I don't know, make tea or something? No. She was stiff, and her hands clutched her bag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She wasn't looking at me directly, and that's what worried me. Viviana never broke eye contact. She always had this way of staring you down, making you feel like she was dissecting every little flaw. What's going on, Viviana? I finally asked, the silence hanging heavy between us. Is everything okay? Ariana. She paused, swallowing hard. She looked at me then, really looked at me, with an expression I'd never seen before, something between pity and guilt. Do you really think you know everything about Nico? My stomach clenched. My mind raced through a million possible answers, 1,000 potential things she could mean by that. I knew Nico had secrets, but they were little things, stupid things he'd tell me after a few drinks, like how he'd once been caught shoplifting as a teenager or how he used to sneak into his high school gym with friends after hours. It was innocent stuff. I'd always felt he was open with me. But now, standing in front of his mother, I felt like I didn't know anything at all. Of course, I know him, I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. We've been together for 5 years. We're getting married. She let out a low, bitter laugh. 5 years, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. That's nothing. I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at her, waiting for her to go on. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn manila envelope. Her hands shook slightly as she handed it to me, her eyes darting to the floor again. I didn't want you to find out this way, but you deserve to know the truth before it's too late. Viviana, what is this? I whispered, my fingers hovering over the flap of the envelope. Just look, she said, her voice cracking. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. Slowly, I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photos and a single letter. The first photo nearly knocked the breath out of me. It was a picture of Nico and Karina. The Karina. His high school sweetheart, his childhood best friend. She'd been a fixture in his family for years, the girl they all assumed he'd marry before he moved to Philly for work, and we met. I knew about Karina, he'd told me she was ancient history. But here she was, in these photos, laughing with him, her hand resting casually on his shoulder. The worst part was that it looked recent. They were outside a cafe I knew well, a little spot just off Rittenhouse Square in Philly that Nico and I used to go to. No, this can't be, I muttered, flipping to the next photo. And the next. There they were, over and over again, together, in different places. Nico's arm around her waist. Them laughing, leaning close. The kind of closeness you didn't just fake with an ex. This wasn't a business meeting or a friendly catch-up. This was something else. Viviana watched me as I flipped through the photos, her expression unreadable. How did you get these? I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. A friend who cares enough about our family to tell me when something's wrong, she said, her tone cold. I had a feeling. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the truth has a way of surfacing, doesn't it? I swallowed hard, my mind spinning. Viviana, I don't understand. Nico told me he hasn't seen Karina in years. Viviana laughed, a dark, humorless sound. Of course, he told you that. He's a master at keeping secrets. I didn't want to believe it either, Ariana, but this has been going on for years. They've been seeing each other on and off since they were teenagers, even after he met you. I thought he would grow up, make the right choice, but here we are. Years. They'd been seeing each other for years? The word echoed in my head, and I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. I felt sick. Betrayed. But more than anything, I felt like a fool. How could I not have seen this? You're sure? I asked, barely able to get the words out. This isn't just some misunderstanding? She didn't even blink. I wish it were. Believe me, I wish my son were a better man. But this is the truth, Ariana. I didn't want you to find out this way, but I couldn't stay silent any longer. I shook my head, gripping the photo so hard my fingers hurt. Why? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why now? Viviana hesitated, her gaze shifting to the floor. Because I thought he would end it. I thought he'd choose you and let her go. But he didn't, and I can't let you walk into a marriage based on lies. You deserve better. Her words hung heavy in the air, settling over me like a weight. I stared down at the photos again, my mind numb. The photos, the letter. It was all there in front of me, undeniable proof that the man I was planning to marry had been lying to me from the start. Break it off, Viviana said, her voice cutting through my thoughts like a knife. You have to. You deserve a real chance at happiness, Ariana. Not this. I looked up at her, my vision blurred by tears. Part of me wanted to scream, to tell her to leave and never come back. But deep down, I knew she was right. The truth hit me like a truck. Nico had lied. He'd kept Karina in the shadows, thinking I'd never find out, thinking he could get away with it. I couldn't even remember how long I sat there, staring at those photos. Viviana watched me, her face almost cold. She looked relieved. I think a part of her had been waiting for this moment. It was twisted, but maybe, in her way, she'd always wanted me out of her son's life, even if that meant showing me his dirty secrets. When she finally left, I sat in silence, the rage bubbling beneath my shock. I felt humiliated. This wasn't the life I wanted or the person I thought I'd been planning to marry. Nico was the one person I'd trusted after everything I'd been through, and he had shattered that trust. He called the next day, all cheerful. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I needed a plan. Over the next week, I pretended everything was normal. I needed time to think, to set things up, and to keep myself from doing something impulsive. Nico called and texted constantly, saying he couldn't wait to be home, how he missed me, how he couldn't wait for our wedding. I played along, keeping my responses short but loving. I knew that if he sensed anything was wrong, he'd try to get ahead of it. He was good at that, clearly. In the meantime, I dug. I found more photos, old social media posts, hidden email exchanges between him and Karina. She'd tagged him in old photos that he'd somehow managed to keep hidden. The worst part? Nico had taken her to all the places we'd been, sometimes just days before he'd taken me. It was all there, clear as day. The cafe near Rittenhouse. A weekend at the shore in New Jersey. That ski lodge in Vermont he'd told me he'd only been to with college buddies. I felt sick realizing it, but I knew what I had to do. When he finally came home from his business trip, I was ready. Ari, babe. He called as he walked in the door, grinning. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close, but this time, I felt nothing but disgust. His lies, his secrets, the betrayal. It all simmered just beneath the surface, but I kept it cool. Hey, Babe, I replied with a forced smile, trying not to recoil. I thought we could celebrate your homecoming. How about a big family dinner? You know, really go all out? His eyes lit up. You want to have my family over? Even my mom? I nodded, smiling sweetly. Of course. I think it's time we all got closer. After all, we're going to be family. He didn't know what was coming. The day of the dinner, I went all out. Nico's whole family showed up, his father, his cousins, his aunts, his sisters, and, of course, Viviana. I'd made a beautiful spread, set out my nicest plates, and put candles on the table. Nico was in high spirits, holding my hand, kissing my cheek, acting like the perfect fiancé. But I could feel Viviana's eyes on me, watching, maybe even nervous. She knew I had to be up to something. When everyone was seated, I stood up to make a toast. Nico looked at me with pride, thinking I was about to declare my love for him in front of his family. He had no idea what was coming. First of all, I said, raising my glass, thank you all for being here tonight. Family is so important, and I know I'm lucky to be joining a family that values loyalty, honesty, and commitment. A few of his aunts nodded, looking touched. Nico beamed, giving me a look like he was the luckiest guy in the world. So, Nico and I have some big news, I continued, my eyes fixed on him. His smile grew even wider, thinking I was about to announce our wedding plans or something similar. Nico has been hiding something, and I think it's time to bring it into the light. The room went quiet. Nico's smile faltered, a flicker of worry flashing across his face. What are you talking about, Ari? He asked, trying to laugh it off. Oh, don't worry, honey. I gave him my sweetest smile. I thought it was only right to tell your family the truth about your business trips and about your old friend Karina. Nico's face drained of color. He stammered, glancing around the room, but no words came out. You see, I recently found out that Nico has been spending a lot of time with Karina, I said, turning to the family. Apparently, they've been seeing each other for years, behind my back. I thought I was the only one in his life, but it turns out, Karina's been right there all along. His family gasped, and his Aunt Rosa shot him a look that could kill. His sisters exchanged shocked glances, and his dad just shook his head, looking disgusted. Viviana's face was a mask of neutrality, but I could see a faint, almost approving smirk tugging at her lips. Ari, stop, Nico hissed, his face turning red. He grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back down, but I yanked away, lifting my chin. Oh, and it gets better, I said, holding up the envelope Viviana had given me. I have photos. Photos of Nico and Karina on their little trips, the cafe near Rittenhouse, that weekend at the shore, and even the ski lodge he told me he'd only been to with his college friends. The family stared at him, horrified. His sisters looked disgusted, his father was seething, and even Viviana crossed her arms, shaking her head slowly. You lied to me, Nico, I said, my voice steady. You lied to all of us. He finally managed to speak, his voice desperate. Ari, please, let's talk about this in private. I laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Oh, we'll talk about it, Nico. But not before your family knows exactly who you are. I trusted you. I gave up everything to move here, to start a life with you. And you threw it all away for someone you couldn't even leave in the past. With that, I grabbed my purse and walked out, leaving him and his family in stunned silence. The next few weeks were a blur, but the satisfaction of that dinner stayed with me. Word spread fast in their family circle, and Nico's sisters made sure everyone knew what he'd done. He called me over and over, begging to talk things through, but I never answered. I blocked him on everything and changed my number. When he finally found me at my new apartment a month later, he looked hollow, defeated. Ari, please, he said, his voice hoarse, I know I messed up, but we were good together. You can't just walk away. I looked him in the eye, feeling nothing but pity. I can, Nico. I did. And I deserve better. I turned and closed the door, leaving him in the hallway, alone, with his lies. 6 months later, I heard through the grapevine that Nico tried to patch things up with Karina, but she'd moved on. His family barely spoke to him, and his mother kept him at arm's length. As for me, I was finally free to live my life on my own terms, knowing I'd had the last word. I built myself back up, stronger than before, and Nico? He was just a bitter memory.